Hey YouTube, Puff and Snuff here, Ian, checking in as always from beautiful Northeast Ohio with what might be take 430 of this video. Um, Actually, it's been a little longer than I'd prefer between videos for me, but I gotta tell you, spent the last week or so down with one hell of a head cold. Miserable, miserable. But that has blown out. I am feeling much better and very excited to be back talking tobacco. You might also notice, hopefully, you'll notice that although it is evening and this room has always been poorly lit, the video should be a little brighter and a little clearer. After about a year or so of hemming and hawing, I've finally gotten around to upgrading the webcam. So not only do you get to see this beautiful face in full vivid detail, the real idea here is that we can get a better look at tins and cans and packaging and the tobacco itself, um, which I hopefully will improve the entire review experience. I will say though that I feel like I've got just a fraction of a second lag between audio and video. I will continue to tinker with that and play with that and get that sorted out. But for now, at least we've got a much improved video experience. So enough with that. On with the show. We have a snus review this evening. As with all of my recent snus reviews, this is done in conjunction with Chris over at In a Pinch. Link to his channel's right down there. Make sure you go check him out. I will say that his snus reviews typically run circles around mine. So if you're here, do yourself a favor, go check him out, because I'm sure he will have more than a little to add to the conversation about this stuff. You've heard this spiel before, but again, we are doing this in conjunction with each other. We're uploading at roughly the same time, but we are not comparing notes, not discussing the snus ahead of time. Whole idea here being let's get two independent reviews of the same product, just to see what each other have to say without any sort of influence. So, what are we talking about? We are talking about GN Tobaccos. Focus. There we go. Islay Whisky Snus. This is, you can see down there, the loose version, which I will say before we really get into the review, although I am fairly new to the YouTube and social media snus community, I gather that there's been a long wait for the loose version of this stuff, and that since its release, there's been a hell of a lot of buzz. So was very excited to get my hands on some and give it a shot. Just at first blush, I got to tell you, the can itself is fantastic. Before we even start breaking it down, it has a nice heft to it. First of all, it's metal, right? So it's not plastic. So the tin itself is a little heavier, a little sturdier, feels a little nicer in the hand. But also it comes with a full 50 grams of tobacco, which in my relatively limited experience, it seems to me that most looses tend to come 8 to 10 grams short of 50. So it's a nice heavy can, a nice full can, and it feels great in the hand, right? So to take a closer look at it, the first thing is that it's kind of a matte finish here, right? It's a smooth matte, and the art here is raved, so there's almost like a topography to the thing, so it really does feel neat to hold. Looking at the thing, you've got the as far as the labeling here, there's your 50 grams, right? Swinging around. All right, so we are made in the old traditional craft style. This is a small batch. This is batch number 4, which you can see. And this is 100% lamina, which to me is a very exciting thing. Whether it is snus, or it is snuff, or it is a cigar, or it is a pipe blend, there's nothing to me that drags the quality down of the smoking or snoozing or snuffing experience than stem material. Even if it's a high quality product, stem material always seems to drag it down. So very glad to see that this is free from that particular problem. But what's really important here, of course, is not the can. And as nice as this can is, what really matters is what's inside. So when you open it, and I'm about a little better than halfway through this thing, the aroma, the first thing you get is whiskey, and there's no mistaking it. But here's the thing: it's whiskey. right? It's not, if you happen to have some experience with pipe tobacco, you know that whiskey or bourbon or rum tend to be very typical toppings for aromatics. But you can sense when you smell it that it's a cheap, maybe even partially synthetic version of whiskey. This is real deal whiskey, and it's real deal Islay whiskey, right? Islay tends to be a fairly peaty, somewhat smoky drink. I'm not much of a Scotch drinker anymore. To be honest, my preferred spirit these days is gin. But when I'm drinking whiskey, I tend to prefer Irish whiskeys, which are not smoked. But in my Scotch days, I always enjoyed the Isleys, right? And so you're talking, the big one, is Lafroig, which if you've ever had Lafroig, you know exactly what a smoky, peaty Scotch is all about. If you've been in a bar where someone, 12 stools down has ordered Lafroig, you know what smoky, peaty Scotch is all about, right? But and those are kind of the comparisons to look at. Lafroig, Ardbeg. There's a couple others that I can't think of. Bruichladdich, I think, is another one. Anyway, so, and that's what you get in the can. You get the real, the sweetness from the whiskey, a little bit of that smoky peatiness, a little bit of the oaky woodsiness from the barrel that the spirit has been aged in. And beneath all of that, you get a very nice, deep, earthy, natural tobacco. You don't get the sense that the tobacco's been fooled with a whole lot, and it's good quality, dark tobacco with the Islay, and it's very much, you can tell that this has been exposed to the oak barrels, and that it has been exposed to the vapor of the actual whiskey itself. So super, super pleasant. But the real test is what happens when it's in the lip. And I've had Aprilla in for probably a little better than a half an hour. But the first thing I've noticed anytime I've put it in is right off the bat you get that whiskey, right? And it's not the booziness of whiskey, right? It's not like you're putting alcohol in your lip. But you get that not quite syrupy, but that thick, vague sugariness that you get from a good brown spirit. You get the oaky woodsiness and just a little bit of smoke. This is not a super smoky, super peaty flavor, but it's there. One thing that I don't get at first, which you almost expect from a dark, earthy tobacco, is that pepperiness that you often get. It's there. It comes out more prevalently. For me, closer to the 15-minute mark, but even then, it's not real predominant. It's not so much that you have to work to find it, but it's never going to jump up and slap you in the face, okay? As it stays in, a lot of times when you get any product, whether it's a snus or a snuff or other forms of smoking tobaccos, a lot of times whatever has flavored the tobacco will begin to fade, and the tobacco, for better or for worse, begins to come out. I never get a real, the Islay never really recedes, but the tobacco itself does manage to kind of stand up and make itself known a little bit more. But it is for me, a fairly stable flavor all the way through the snus. And the only difference, again, being the pepper kind of shows up a little bit later on. So as far as aroma, as far as packaging, as far as flavor, this is excellent stuff. This is stuff worth buying in some quantity if you can get it in quantity and holding on to, because it is damn good. I guess you got to talk about a few things then from the technical aspect. As far as staying in place, This doesn't really slide around on me or start to break up or turn to mud um, until at least 45 minutes in or so. Obviously, not quite as long now because I'm talking and that's generating more saliva, and the movement tends to make it want to shift and shuffle. But if you're just sitting back, relaxing with it, it stays right where you want it for a good long time before it starts to break down. Which for me is a very important thing in a loose. I know some people aren't as bothered by a loose that starts to turn muddy. I don't want to say it bothers me, but it very much determines whether it's a snus that I'm going to take out with me, whether to work or out socially or wherever, versus whether I will only use it at home. This is very much a out and about. You're not going to, look like you've got mud in your teeth um, kind of snus. The other thing we have to talk about is nicotine. I get the sense that nicotine is on the heavy side of moderate in this one. I will say that if, I have a fairly high nicotine tolerance, as I've said here before, between um, snus and snuff and pipe tobacco and cigars. I have a fairly steady stream of nicotine in my system. But if I try this on an empty stomach or first thing in the morning, um, I am prone to hiccups on this, which is a very uncommon thing for me these days. So um, there is a nice bit of nicotine in here, so there's no need to want to go with a particularly large Prilla for the sake of that nicotine hit. You can use a reasonable size, which will make the tin last even longer. And because of um, I guess the authenticness of the flavors in here, you don't need a large quantity to get the flavor out of it either. So um, from an aesthetic aspect, I love this stuff. From the aroma and the snoozing experience, I love this stuff. From the more technical aspects, I love this stuff. It is a really, really, really great snooze. Um, Speaking more to people like me, because I know there are YouTube reviewers who know light years more. Uh, I'm not sure light years is really an adequate measurement for knowledge, but who knows significantly more about snus than me. But speaking to people who may be relatively new to snus, or are not new to snus, but new to branching out into new kinds of snus, for those folks, guys, you got to try this stuff. I cannot imagine, unless you are specifically averse to whiskey, um, you got to try this. Really, really, really a fan. So thank you, Chris, for getting a can of this my way to try. Very much appreciated. This is an absolute winner. As far as the review, guys, that's all for me.